So, hello everyone. We continue with the next session, the keynote talk provided by Professor Mackey and Professor Jacobson, I guess from United States, New York. I guess it's quite early over there. And I'm very, very happy to have you here on board, and I greet you very warmly, and I'm really happy that you are here. For those who don't know them, both are very renowned contributors in the field of information literacy, and probably most known for their development of the metaliteracy concept. And this concept is published and distributed in different journals. If you have a look at the chat, I put in some references to their work. One important publication was surely the book on metaliteracy in practice. It's just one of the many works. And one thing I really can recommend is this MOOC on metaliteracy, empowering yourself in a connected world. I accomplished that a few years back, and they are also very active, as you can see on two recent publications. And yeah, I'm very happy to have you here on board, and you talk about the role of metaliteracy in designing open learning initiatives. After your talk, we have 5 to 10 minutes time for questions and discussion round. And as with the other sessions too, we can, I guess, continue the discussion in the workshop. So welcome again. Thank you very much for being here. The stage is yours, Trudi and Tom.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the invitation, and we're excited about the presentation and the conference.
Yes, we are so pleased to be with you this morning or afternoon.
Very early here. We might see the sunrise behind us, but we're very happy to be here. So let's begin. Today we're going to talk about the role of metaliteracy in designing open learning initiatives, and we have a lot of new insights to share with you today. And this is an overview of what our keynote will discuss. So we'll first talk about this fractured information environment that we're all a part of, and I'm sure that everyone can relate to that. We'll talk about some of those divisions that have created this fracture. We'll also talk about metaliteracy for these challenging times, and I'm sure we can all relate to that. We're really in these unprecedented times. And we'll talk also about how metaliteracy can help rebuild trust. It's really this idea of trust is one of the themes from the MOOC, actually, the PostTruth MOOC, where we talk about building collaborative communities of trust. So how is that possible given the challenges of this divided and fractured information environment? And then we'll close with a section on designing open learning initiatives with metaliteracy and show many examples that I think you'll find interesting. So let's take a look at this fractured information environment that we're in. And I think in many ways, this first image and quote really gets at some of these challenges. And this is a quote early on in the pandemic. In fact, the term epidemic was used, and not pandemic, but of course we know it's turned into a pandemic. But it really gets at what some of the issues are, in addition to the obvious health concerns, is that we're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. And who would have thought that not only would we have this major health crisis around the world, but that we'd have so many challenges with information, and information that really would save lives, and that there would even be debates on whether or not to wear masks. So that there's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation that's circulated about something so important to the global community has been, I think, one of the most surprising aspects of it. And as educators, clearly this is something we really need to be focused on. Another aspect here of this fractured information environment is this idea of an echo chamber. And I've selected a quote here going back to 2008, which really shows the perspective here of how long this issue has been a concern. And this quote is really from the first book that introduced this idea, and talking about the influence of really conservative opinion media, which includes talk radio, cable TV, and now of course social media, and the impact this has on contributing to this fractured and divided information environment, because it keeps like-minded opinions together. But there's something else that happens here that I think really shows the problem, and it's the end of this quote where it says that the issue with this that it magnifies the messages delivered and insulates from rebuttal. And that's clearly not democratic. So if someone is in an echo chamber just talking with people who think like them, that's bad enough. But I think this idea of preventing other opinions from getting through is really the part of the problem, because that's not a democratic dialogue. And the term we've seen most recently here in the United States, and I'm sure that this incident from January 6th has been looked at globally as well with some shock and dismay, but it's clearly something that we've been focused on, which was this assault on the United States Capitol. And this image, by the way, this is an open license image from NASA with a focus here on the supermoon. But in the foreground, you can see this image of the Peace Monument, which is in front of the US Capitol. And I was really struck by so many of the images that came out from the events that day really showed this statue. And in some ways, the look of the two people portrayed here maybe showed the kind of shock and dismay of this event taking place. And another thing I noticed from that day was that something expressed in this quote from this piece that was in the Associated Press, which is that many in the mob ransacked the Capitol, did so while live streaming, posting on Facebook, and taking selfies, turning the US Capitol into a theater of real-time and often strikingly ugly and violent far-right propaganda. And that's something I noticed in all of these images, that people were gladly taking selfies and documenting what they were doing. So very different from the kind of empowerment that I think we often think of with these technologies and these social media applications. So a lot has certainly changed with this. And clearly we're seeing, and as we're learning more about this was certainly an echo chamber of conspiracy theories, far-right propaganda, and in many ways, these groups that were emboldened using these technologies and staying within their like-minded communities. So what do we do then as educators? And here I think is a quote, because we have so many challenges associated with these kinds of concerns. And I think this quote really captured it well. And this was a statement from the American Association of Colleges and Universities the day after this event. And what I like about this is that it really gets beyond thinking about the knowledge and skills and the technologies, to really focusing on what it says in terms of, in a democratic society, that what we want to do with students is also help them form habits of heart and mind that liberate their thinking and equip for and dispose them to the creation of a more just, equitable, and inclusive society through civic involvement. So clearly that gets beyond just using the technologies and gaining digital skills, to really thinking of really what are some of this kind of effective response, the habits of heart, and also this reflective piece, the habits of mind as well. And I think that's something we'll be talking about today with the meta-literacy framework, which we think includes these aspects, as well as this focus on civic engagement and the responsibilities that go along with that. So those are some of the challenges. Why do we focus on literacy and information literacy and meta-literacy? I think this quote just captures it so well. This is from Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. So it's an older quote from 2003, but it just really says, I think, what we're all aspiring to, is that literacy is the key to delivering the potential of every human being, the key to opening up a future of freedom and hope. So there is optimism. There's reasons to be optimistic, and that's certainly what we're aspiring to, knowing, of course, that we have global challenges in terms of access to literacy and literacy education. And this quote, I think, is also important. This is from UNESCO because it shows how even the definition of literacy itself has expanded. So it goes beyond this traditional notion of reading and writing, which of course is important, and also counting skills, so that it also means the identification, understanding, interpretation, creation, and communication in an increasingly digital, text-mediated, information-rich, and fast-changing world. So here the focus is on, this idea of learners as producers. It's not just enough, for reading and writing. We really need to go beyond that. We need to engage learners in these technologies, but also think of the responsibilities associated with that and some of the ethical dimensions and responsibilities of being an information producer. And that's really one of the ideas that inspired the Metaliteracy framework. And we'll talk about that. And then here's a quote too, in terms of setting the stage a bit, is that in thinking about all these literacies and trying to go beyond literacy itself and thinking in broader terms, that digital literacy, which is really, I think, one of the most popular forms of literacies that I think people really recognize and understand, but that in many ways it misses the mark. And we recognize too that even digital literacy too has expanded in terms of what digital literacy means, that it goes beyond technology. But I think this point really gets at this idea that educators, sometimes we get stuck on this idea of technology as the issue, and that we really need to think beyond that. We really need to think beyond the devices that our students are using and really dig much deeper. So that's what we're hoping to do today when we talk about meta-literacy. And so looking at meta-literacy then for these challenging times, Trudi is going to discuss this next section and talk about how meta-literacy fits in with some of these challenges. Trudi?
Thank you, Tom. So we're going to be talking about meta-literacy and the meta-literate mindset. So Tom, if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. As Tom mentioned, it's more than just skills. The quote he included on sort of habits of heart and mind, it really is something that needs to be integrated into oneself and a way of thinking. So if we can move to the next slide to explain a little bit more about the meta-literacy framework. So it is challenging this traditional skills-based approach to information literacy. This is how you do this, this is how you find that, which doesn't really work particularly well when everything is changing so quickly. And it's missing out on those habits of mind. Critical thinking has always been extremely important when considering information. And I know that there are these confirmation bias, the bubbles that we're sort of ensconced in. And so it can be really hard to think critically, but it's also so incredibly important. And being open and listening to other voices. Then there's advancing effective participation in social media, online communities, and virtual environments. And when we think about this, technology mediates so much of what it is that we do. And so the way we are online and the way we interact with people online can often affect what it is that we're doing in person. So I think it's interconnected here, that online is really important because it is so pervasive in our lives. And we really need to think about how it is that we are participating there and how we're collaborating with others in online communities. And again, because this is so important in our lives, it really does impact us both online and off. So the slide Tom is showing right now, the core components of metaliteracy. You're going to see a lot of circular diagrams this morning. We love sort of this interconnected notion of things. And this is the first one. This one's got a circle sort of in the background. So the metaliterate learner, we're thinking about 4 elements, and I'll just mention them now, but we're going to talk more about each one of these. So there's the learning domains, sort of how one is learning. There's the roles one takes on as a metaliterate learner. There are the characteristics, and then there's also the goals and the learning objectives. And so we're first going to look at sort of an integrated model, and then we'll go on to these individual ones, and we'll talk more about each of these. So here you sort of see, again, circular. There are the learning domains, the roles, which are highlighted now. Yeah, and right before that were the characteristics. So these are all interconnected. They don't really line up the way it looks on this model, but they're all piece of the whole. So what we'll do is we'll talk about each of these individually. And so we're going to start with the inner circle, which you can see here with the 4 learning domains. And often sort of skills-based approaches to information and learning focus on the ones that are on the right-hand side, the cognitive, what it is you should know after you've learned something, and the behavioral, what you're able to do. But if we think about learning in a more comprehensive way, it really opens up a lot of opportunities and ways to be more effective in learning. So there's the affective in the bottom left. So it's changes in the emotions or attitudes through engagement with learning activities. So it could be how you sort of feel or your attitudes afterwards or while you are learning. And I am finding with students that this is particularly relevant to them. They've never thought about how it is that they feel when they're learning. And I think this is opening up a new prism for them to look at their learning and to think about how to be more effective. And then the metacognitive in the top left. That is something that is critically important to metaliteracy. It's reflecting on your own thinking, your own learning, and really being cognizant of it. And this reflective piece is prominent in so much of what it is that we're going to be talking about, showing, and in the resources that we're making available through these slides. So from here, we will move on to the learner roles. And what you are seeing here are questions about each role. When one thinks about these roles very consciously, I think it shifts one's realization of what one is capable of doing and perhaps what one needs to learn to be effective in a particular role. The questions that are here came from an initiative that I'll be talking about a little bit later with a political science professor who uses metaliteracy with her students a great deal. But she said that the roles were not as tangible to them as she had hoped. And so having these questions to really think about each one. So as a producer, do you produce and share your own user-generated content? And then sort of opening up what this content could be. So selfies, people may not have thought of that as producing information. Digital images, video, multimedia. So these sort of expand awareness and also make it more concrete. There's a couple of roles that we don't have questions for here. They are on the, all of these are on the Metaliteracy website, and there's a link to that. But one is teacher. And we all know that to teach somebody something, one has to know it very well, but there's a lot of responsibilities involved with that role. And then on the right-hand side, there's translator, which isn't necessarily a translator from one language, say from German to English, but a translator of ideas. And so if something is written in a very scientific way, perhaps, if it's something that you'd like to share with others who might not have that background, making it more understandable. So from here, we're going to go to the characteristics, and I will pass this back to Tom.
Thanks, Trudi. And you can probably see here, there's definitely an alignment between the roles that learners play and the characteristics, which we see as aspirational and learners to gain this process. So as producers of information, they are productive in terms of supporting these creative and inventive productions, no matter what they are. They gain the ability to be collaborative, which is not, anyone who's done collaborative projects knows that's not always the easiest thing, and it's not something that students automatically, an attribute that they automatically have. So but it's something that they can work toward. Being reflective is obviously an outcome of the metacognitive aspect, and that can be applied to so many different learning experiences. This idea of being civic-minded, which again helps to build these connected communities of trust, because it again goes beyond the knowledge and the skills to really think about the contributions that individuals make in their communities. And that could be online communities. It could be thinking about the responsibilities you have as a participant in these environments, but it could also be any kind of community, really, and the kinds of connections that we make. Another key aspect of the metaliteracy model are the metaliteracy goals and learning objectives. So there are these 4 overarching goals, and for each of these goals, there's then a subset of related objectives. So the first goal, actively evaluate content, which is clearly important, and thinking about one's own biases. After sort of these challenges of the post-truth, what we call the post-truth world, emerged with so much misinformation and disinformation and confirmation bias, we made sure to change that goal to focus on having students really reflect upon and think about the biases that they might have. This idea then of engaging with intellectual property in an ethical, responsible way is goal number 2. Goal 3, again, this focus on producing and sharing in collaborative environments. And goal 4, developing learning strategies to think about this really as a lifelong learning process. And if you see in the center of this slide, these are all we've been very fortunate to have translations, actual translations of the goals and learning objectives. And by the way, we do need a translation in German. So if anyone at the conference is interested in that, we would certainly welcome that. So definitely let us know. But we're really excited that because the goals and objectives are so core to metaliteracy, to have these translated is just excellent. And all the translations are available via metaliteracy.org. So how then can metaliteracy help rebuild trust? So we're optimistic, we're always hopeful for the future, and we see a part of that of building these trusted communities, which have clearly faced so many challenges. So how do we do this? And Trudi's going to start with I mean, one way to do this is really to encourage students to be these responsible producers of information. And Trudi's going to talk about this one example that she's been involved with her students.
I taught a first-year experience course this past fall, and there were a number of projects in the class that I felt could be non-disposable assignments. So essentially, assignments that don't go just to the professor, but provide value to others. And so, Tom, if you could click onto the site, which look at this extremely quickly. So the students in my course, mostly in small groups, so working collaboratively, came up with resources that are available to other students. And I'm not sure that it went through.
Oh, it's not. Oh, okay.
Being
Oh, it might
mistaken.
not when we, I may have to share screens separately for that.
Okay, then that's fine.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to take a look at this at some point, they've created an FAQ about the first year experience. They created zines about what other first year students should know based on what they had learned. They have podcasts, videos, infographics. And so it allowed them to think about their learning in a different way as they were considering creating these items for others and to be helpful for others. And also the affective learning domain was particularly important here. Some of them went into some of this kicking and screaming and came out on the other side loving it. But they felt a real sense of responsibility to others. So I think that that can help with this future where we're trying to be optimistic. Tom.
Thanks, Trudi. And another aspect of metaliteracy is really emphasizing the connectedness of these environments. And this is just an example. I mean, there's so many different ways to illustrate that, but I thought this was a creative one. This is Dr. Valerie Hill, who has written about metaliteracy in relation to metamodernism. And she's also active in Second Life. And you can see these images from the work that she's doing, where she's connecting learners in the virtual world of Second Life. She has, in this one image, she actually has our books, which are accessible in Second Life. And then she also has, to the right, these learners as well. So that shows, you know, this can happen in communities, it can happen in classrooms, it can happen online, and it can happen even in this virtual environment. And then another, again, showing how these ideas can be applied in so many different settings. The work that Sarah Nagel is doing is also interesting. And this really emphasizes a metacognitive example. So Sarah is really focusing on metaliteracy in relation to maker spaces and maker literacy. So she's really connecting, she sees metaliteracy as a bridge between the ACRL framework and maker literacy, so maker spaces. And what's interesting here is that she really talks about the metacognitive aspect of this. So this is a quote from Sarah, who also wrote something for a guest post for our blog. And she writes that the maker mindset involves critical evaluation of one's own beliefs and outlooks. So in this kind of place-based environment, these ideas also can be explored, which we're really excited about seeing. And Trudi, you're going to talk about a research example.
Yes, so the idea of metaliterate learners as researchers, this harks back to that political science professor I mentioned earlier. And so they are working on creating quests, which are activities that are modeled after ones in our digital badging system, which I'll talk about in a minute. But they have to go beyond their own perspective, think about those of others, think about where those people are coming from. So really trying to get beyond a particular viewpoint. So it's researchers with a very particular type of approach that they're taking.
Thanks, Trudi. And here's another example. And this is from a course that I'm teaching with one of my colleagues at Empire State College, Dr. Sheila Aird. And she's the director of our European programs, and she's stationed in Prague. And in the fall, we brought together, we both taught this course, digital storytelling, but we brought our sections together. So we had students from the United States, Canada, Prague, Tirana, and it was just an exciting experience to have them all in the same fully online course in Moodle. And this one, I mean, this demonstrates connectedness, reflection, all of these features that we've been talking about. But here I wanted to emphasize how students are also teachers in these environments. And this is a key concept with meta-literacy, that meta-literate learners are teachers. And so in these collaborative environments, then we argue that when a student is sharing their knowledge, sharing their knowledge maybe about a technology or about a topic, they become teachers. And this is a role that they may not see themselves in the same way that we found that they may not see themselves as producers of information. So it's important to foreground this in the learning experience. And in this one example, students in our course, students can create these very dynamic multimedia digital stories. And an essential part of it is the peer reviews that they do. So for every project that they create, they respond to at least 2 other students in class and provide a constructive peer review. They also, we find in the student cafe, they provide incredible peer support. So talking about software applications or talking about the approach that they're taking to a particular story. And then all this culminates really in an international collaboration where they work across distances on a final digital story project. And this is just a kind of a quick example. I'll just show a real quick snippet here. And we don't have time to show more of it, but you just see how dynamic and interesting that these projects are when students are producers of information. And Trudi, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. So here is another example of a non-disposable assignment. Students in another course that I teach actually add content to Wikipedia. So the taking on of the meta-literate learner roles is very real, very immediate when you are doing something that will be looked at potentially by millions of people around the world. And Alex Gucci, a student in the course in the fall, does mention that you have a very different feeling about the work that you're doing that emphasizes the roles. And the work that the students do here also goes through a peer review, which Tom mentioned in connection with his, the last slide. So students here get peer reviews from within my course. They also get it from a first-year writing and critical inquiry course students. And there's the possibility that they're getting it from people all over the world. So they are publishers, and they are very public publishers. Tom.
Thanks, Trudi. And we'll move through this last section quickly so we can get to your questions. But you can tell we get excited when we talk about the student projects. There's so much potential here. But this last section, we'll talk about designing open learning with meta-literacy. And you've seen some examples of that already. And these are just some ideas that we have, and we'll just go through these quickly. So really, we have so many resources available. Think about the ones that really would meet your particular needs. Adapt those goals and learning objectives to your own purposes. You can use the same wording, or you can adapt them in a way that makes sense for your own experience. Encourage learners to really think of themselves in those active meta-literate roles. We found that by foregrounding that, they really take on that responsibility and dig much deeper. Also develop learning activities that promote reflection. There's so many different ways to do that. And also encourage learners to identify the strengths that they have, as well as the area for continued growth. And Trudi, you're going to talk about the digital badging systems. This is one of our open learning initiatives.
And there is an enormous amount of content here. There is a link available. The content that is up on this website doesn't really have the badging connected with it, but there is, it really highlights 4 areas: the producer and collaborator, master evaluator, empowered learner, and digital citizen. And for all of these, there's a lot of activities, that are sort of sequenced, and I really encourage you to check it out. This can be used as is by an individual, by an instructor, but on the next slide, you'll see, again, going back to that political science course, there is something that this professor, Professor Sally Friedman, is doing, where her students need to complete 9 of these items from that. And they also have to create content that they share with the rest of the class. So the research goes into that. But if they do this well, they are issued a badge, the Expand Horizons badge that the professor and I worked on setting up for the students. So this is something that could be used in any setting. She tailors the content to what her students need. An individual learner could just sort of look through and concentrate on what they're interested in. So it's infinitely flexible. And let's see. So our next slide is the I Succeed online course. This was included in a SUNY, State University of New York version of some Lumen content that is designed for first-year students. And there are, I think, 11 modules, one of which is Metaliteracy. So this is specifically designed for first-year students. It includes all of those things we talked about, the roles, the domains, characteristics, and learning activities. It really engages students. For example, one of the things they have to do in this is a digital story. So on our next slide, you can see, let's see, yes, the 5 outcomes for this course. And so these are the 5 units that are there, and you'll see that they reflect the things that we have been talking about. But this is something that can be used with first-year students, and it can be adapted. So again, more open content. Tom.
Thanks, Trudi. And I'm just going to close with this mention of the PostTruth MOOC that was mentioned early on, that has these 6 interrelated modules with a focus on how learners could empower themselves in this challenging post-truth world of misinformation and disinformation. And one of the key themes that runs through the MOOC is this idea of how do we build a community of trust. And this is something I just wrote about, so feel free to read this analysis of the MOOC and this idea of building connected communities of trust. In many ways, I think we see the MOOC as a community of trust, but we also want, because you can go into this MOOC and explore these issues in a way that's really a trusted community. So you can take on these really challenging issues, but do it in a way that's thoughtful and respectful. And but we also wanted to model, and ask questions. What is a community of trust, and how do we build one? And that's really it. We did want to mention that we do have a new book coming out, and here's the cover. So this is actually the first time this is being shown. So we're really excited about this next book, Metaliteracy in a Connected World. And we're available to take your questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm quite happy because I again noticed that we are really on the same page. We have some very similar ideas, and I think we should really stay in touch and collaborate, build a community of trust. If you, it's not the right analogy, but okay. There are already questions coming up. So I would say I postpone mine and let the audience speak. Would you say that metaliteracy also differs strongly based on the country, or rather the information culture of the citizens, like different goals for educators? Yeah, this is the question differentiation and with regard to person-based or cultural context. Or would you rather say this is a scheme that can be used holistically overall? Interesting question. I guess I also asked this question last time, if you see any cultural aspects. Yeah, good question.
I'll just start, and I'm sure Trudi has ideas about this too. I do think it's a holistic model. I think that's something that people often recognize in the model. I mean, all these circular diagrams that Trudi pointed out really is about connectedness and interrelationship. I do think we need to always consider the cultural context, and I think that's why we see it as a model that's adaptable. We always want to bring that into it, and some of the objectives really focus on sort of understanding and being open to multiple perspectives, global perspectives. That has to be brought into it, but we recognize that each individual situation might be different, and we hope that the goals and objectives are adaptable. Trudi, what are your thoughts?
I'm just thinking about where we see sort of other scholarly work that's citing our work is coming from. And there's a great deal from Spanish-speaking countries and also from China, which really sort of interests me. I do think that the cultural basis certainly plays a large role in this, as has been mentioned, but I find that the sort of spread and looking at sort of the global view of where metaliteracy is having an impact indicates that there are certainly elements of it that are of interest in a variety of countries with a variety of different types of learning environments.
Would you, when I put this further, would you say that this cultural or national or whatever a systemic societal concept would be a kind of additional domain for your metaliteracy concept? Is there some kind of cultural, societal domain or something to reflect? Where am I in? How am I socialized?
It's interesting that the domains that we talk about, I think, are for everyone. I think the cultural, and it's certainly definitely an excellent idea for us to think through. I think it emerges in the really in the objectives. Maybe it should be stronger in one of the goals. It does appear in the objectives, and perhaps it could be strengthened by maybe even that fourth goal. It's because I know it's in the objectives, but maybe it needs to be stronger there. I think that one of the reasons there's international interest in this, as Trudi mentioned, is that it is an adaptable model and it's holistic, and people seem to relate to it, and there seems to be an openness to it to adapt to different situations. And I think also that's why we've created so many things in open environments. So we've really embraced this idea of OER and trying to make as much available in an open format as possible. Trudi?
Yeah, I just looked up the objective because I knew that there was one too, and it's recognize diverse cultural values and norms to create and share information for global audiences. So not exactly what you're talking about, but I think that some of the idea is there. And I know we do have a digital global contributor badge in the badging content too. So so there's some hints of this there.
Yeah. I would have thought maybe it's a part of the metacognitive perspective. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's just my talk now.
Well, I like your idea earlier of collaborating, so maybe that's something we can collaborate on.
Yeah, sure. But
certainly connect to building communities of trust.
Yeah, we should, and I hope we can. But okay, let's continue with the questions here. Comment: being critical shouldn't mean to be only critical to voices that contradict dominant approaches, for example, COVID policy, but being critical to all information. So I think we shouldn't create civic role models, but equip students to become independent thinkers, comparing and judging all kind of professional and scientific views. And this is a big challenge. Interesting remark. What is your comment or remark to the remark?
I think that the big challenge part is definitely correct. One of the things that I'm seeing when I work with students is that they're skeptical about everything, which can be good in some circumstances, but is not necessarily always skeptical. So, seeing students where if you've definitely established that there's some authority behind a scientific paper, for example, still thinking, I've seen them still think of that as just one opinion. And so I'm somewhat worried about, it's really important to teach them to be critical, to question, but realize when it is that they don't need to continue to question, to put it in a not so clear way, I guess. But I am worried that they're looking at everything with the exact same skeptical eyes, and so they might be treating a paper that actually does have some authority the same way they might a commercial website.
Yeah,
I agree. And we really tried to strengthen that in the goals and objectives by focusing. I think we even have an objective that says, recognize that experts do exist. I mean, taking it to that level, that there is such a thing as expertise. Because I think a large people don't believe anything that seems to make them open to believing anything. Such as conspiracy theories and the misinformation and disinformation, they seem emboldened to be able to believe that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's important to focus on this idea that there are ways of verifying information, and some of these traditional editorial filters, because they've left. That's really part of the problem. And the civic piece, it's an interesting point. I don't know if it's modeling just one kind of civic engagement, but it's saying that this is important. And again, that's another one of those ideas that I think is adaptable.
Yeah, I guess if I may comment, I guess it's a very important point, not only being skeptical and then resulting in following one's own confirmation bias, but also think about how can this claim secure some kind of validity, or is there a backup on the factual side or whatever. Okay, this is an interesting question. I guess we cannot finish now. Now to further questions, Mario Hiebert asks how does Metaliteracy answers media literacy education goal to make visible what are often invisible structures? Does it tackle issues of platform capitalism, black box society, data extractivism, and monetization, and so on? Hui, complex question. Good question.
I would say that Metaliteracy focuses on the individual learner. And so there are things mentioned here in this extremely interesting question that don't really play a role in it, except how one sort of engages with the information and to look further. Tom, what do you think?
I agree. I think you're right. It's really about the individual kind of this information environment in this environment. I do think that there's a critique of sort of proprietary social media, and that came out in our book meta-literate learning for the post-truth world. It's clearly embedded in the MOOC. It's really trying to look very critically at these social media applications that kind of, took over this web space that Tim Berners-Lee, envisioned as something for everyone. So I think that's, in reading that question, a lot of terms there, that's kind of what resonates with me. And I do think there's a part of the characteristics of being adaptable technology, but we try to talk about it as being, critically adaptable, so that you're open to using these environments, but you're asking good questions about the technology platforms and systems and the powers that go behind it.
Thank you very much. We have other questions, and we have this time constraint. So I would say that we at least aim that people have 5-minute break to stand up and get some refreshments and things like that. But I guess we have also time to answer one of the statements or questions. Maybe you would like to choose what is of your concern. There are different questions. One was with Donald Trump, and yeah, the choice is yours.
I just saw Emilie's question about the badging. Could answer fairly also literacy work of those badges. They're best integrated into a course. It's what a course instructor is willing to do. So I, for example, have had my students complete one or more of those 4 components within the main badging system. Others are finding that picking and choosing from amongst them. But if somebody, for example, were interested in self-study, they could work through that without perhaps having anybody to review the activities that go along with it.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is also an interesting topic, because we at the moment have local certification, but maybe that's not the end of the story. Okay, so yeah, I think it shows we have a lot of points for discussion, and I guess there are also some thoughts that are surely of interest in the workshop. But I guess now we should close this session and continue. Thank you very much. Yeah, and we will discuss it further in the workshop. And yeah, I don't know, in Germany we have this tradition that we put our fingers on the table, and but yeah, in the online environment it's not that possible. But I guess, yeah, thank you very much. Other people are cheering if you have a look at the left side. Thank you very much, Trudi and Tom. And now we have a short break of 7 minutes when my watch or clock is right, and we continue at 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you so much.